different notes.
Like, oh, is this on? Okay, guys, can you guys hear me? Great, that's great. Okay, let's get this started. HTML and CSS, the best things you two will ever, or you all will ever learn. Okay. Oh yeah, but I'm Felina, and Kwong and Nick will present the workshop. I'll be explaining what HTML and CSS is. Okay. So first, why does this even matter? Well, we have an example of our great menu from MIT, and it's split into two things called HTML and CSS. On the left is CSS, and on the right is HTML. You see, those are two pretty different things, at least on first sight, and we'll get into why it's different later. Okay, so essentially, HTML is a hypertext markup language, and it is the language that your browser uses in order to describe like the structure of the page. And so you can think of HTML as the structure. So look at these cool memes. So funny. We will look at the top right picture for now. And you can really see how HTML is the structure or the skeleton of this dude. And we'll talk about the later parts like JS and CSS later. Okay. So HTML is structure, and how that structure is, it's nested boxes on a web page. So as an example, we'll look at this cool comic, and we'll see how these nested boxes are placed in this page. So for now, I guess, does anyone know, or can anyone see any boxes on this page? If you guys see any, feel free to raise your hand and then point them out. Okay, great, good. That's a trick question. Not. This is a big box. Let's see. Oops. Okay. Here is a big box. That is one of the boxes in HTML. And then HTML is nested boxes, so there are even more boxes inside. Very cool. There's even more. There's this box. And then even more boxes. More and more. Okay. There's a lot of boxes. So I guess it wasn't a trick question. Okay, so we see that HTML is all about nested boxes. Let's look at the code to actually see how it is written into these nested boxes. So we have a starter code right now called hello.html, and it's pretty simple. It's very short. And this is what it looks like on the site. It's very cool, very snazzy. You have a heading, paragraph, and a title. So if we look at this code a little bit deeper, specifically at the top, we have this thing called doc type HTML, and this is basically just to like make sure that your code doesn't use any of the fallback versions of like HTML, and it makes sure that you use the latest HTML on your page. So other than that, you don't have to remember too much about it. Just make sure to put it in your HTML code. And then over here, we have the HTML root. Similar to doc type, you just have to remember to put it in. It's always there in your HTML code. Now, I think on the previous slide, you could have seen that there were a couple of things that look just like this. Specifically, there are a bunch of opening tags and closing tags. Closing tags have the slash, and an opening tag, they don't have the slash. And what it basically does is it kind of acts as our box. So whatever is inside is nested inside that box. So looking back at our code, we can already see based off of our opening and closing tags where these boxes are. So we have the root HTML container or box. We have the head, we have the title box, we have the body, and so on. And over here, these elements also have meaning to it. So their names tell us what they do, usually. So for example, H1 is a level 1 header, and that's just saying that everything inside, i.e. heading, that is a level 1 header, and that's what you can see on some later slide that shows the website. Okay, and then one thing about these boxes, it's very complicated, as in we can only have boxes within boxes. We cannot have anything like this, where part of a box is in a box, but part of a box is not in a box. We must have boxes enclosed in each other. So no weird things going on. Okay, so I guess we can also see that already heading looks different from paragraph. And so the tags have something to do with this. And we also see that they already come with some preset styling, as in like, oh, heading is already bolded, paragraph is not, it's smaller. And so these tags come with preset styling, but you can change that later with CSS, which I'll talk about soon. Okay. And then at the top in your head, this is where all of your metadata goes. So it is just data about your site. For example, we have the title. There you can see on the top of the tab. And then we can also have, but not mentioned over here, we can also have like scripts. So those are just imports or like JavaScript files, which you'll use later on, and also styles. So that's a CSS style sheet, which you will also see later on. So that's the title that you'll see in the head. Okay. And now in the body, we see everything on the page. So that's where, so if you want to have things on your sites that people can see, put things in your body. And over here, like described before, we have our heading, which is really big, already preset with some styling, and in our paragraph. And also note that anything you put outside of a tag, but still within the body, you can still see it as text. So here are some basic HTML tags. There are actually a bunch, but it's easier to just learn as you search. So if you ever need one, just search it up and see how to use it. But the top 3 are what's necessary for your HTML document. So you'll put them in all of your HTML files, while the bottom 2 are the most generic, and it doesn't really come with any preset like styles. Okay. Okay. And so now let's talk about HTML attributes. They're going to be very important with CSS. So right now we have our tags, we have our opening and closing tag. And then now we have an attribute. So an attribute is something that modifies the tag. So over here, ABC is our attribute, and XYZ is our value. And this is pretty useful for CSS and also for these tags called links and images. So as an example, we can look at a link. Now A is short for anchor, and it will create this. So in order to do so, we have this attribute whose name is href, and then a value, which should be the URL of the go-to. So you can put your link here as above, and it works. It goes to WebLab, although I can't show it because it's static. And then similarly for images, we also have an attribute. For that, it's called source, or the source of your image. So the attribute value is then your file. And one thing for images is that you don't have a closing tag. Instead, it's self-closing. So you can just concatenate it, just have a slash, the slash image. And it's very good. It works on the site. But in one instance where it can't work is if our directory changes. So now our machine.gif, our image, is within the images file. So one thing to note is to make sure that you have the right address of your image. So now that everything is changed, we have to put in images / pushing.gif because we're looking at it from app. And then we only see images in hello.html. We don't see pushing.gif. So if we use the previous example, we won't be able to get anything on our page. So just one thing to note, remember that you have to use the right address. Okay. And then next, we have div and span, which I briefly mentioned before. These don't really have much of a meaning, but you guys will probably use this a lot. So a div is a block section in the document, and a span is your inline section. And what that means is, well, we'll see an example. Okay, so if we put our two headings and paragraph into our div, we see that nothing changes. Great. But it means that they are in a nested box. Okay. And there's a lot of tags. And like I said before, the real way to learn is to Google. Google is your friend. And then you can learn after you Google. Don't forget that part. And you'll learn that they don't have any meaning. Div and span, they don't have any meaning. And please look at MDN web docs over W3 schools. I know that that pops up as like one of the first web searches or the first recommended, but it sucks. I mean, no, it's good, but like MDN is better because these are actually real people whose job is to make things more understandable. They write things on MDN web docs, and it's their job to do this. So you know it's legit. Okay. And so like div and spans, they have no meaning, but they are very good making boxes around things. And so a lot of you guys can ask like, oh, why not just use div all the time? Like, why do we even need the paragraph or the whatever, the H1 header, when you can just put it all in div, because it's all text anyways. Oh. Well, it's bad. I mean, it's not bad, but it could be bad. So if we search on MDM docs, like a good web labber, we'll see that div doesn't represent anything. And it's not a really semantic element, where semantic means that like the tags are just descriptive of what they actually do, like article, nav, header, footer. Like nav represents the navigation bar, so an article represents an article. All of these are descriptive tags, other than div, which just says that, oh, I'm a blog. Okay, so one thing to ask then is, why should we even use these more descriptive tags? Why should we use semantics? And one thing is, you can see right here. I wonder if this, where it is.
In all the technology. Menu, application menu, show all. Bookmarked a few websites.
So,
Type form.
Audio. There are way too.
Yep, your sound setting.
Huh?
Your sound settings. I think it's because like sometimes the control like doesn't.
Oh, okay. Let me Oh, this shows this side. Maybe I'll just. Okay.
I think just like,
Oh, yeah.
it's like usually sound options. Oh, but you have to plug it in when you do this.
Oh, okay.
Yep, wait, do you have the sound settings?
Sounds
Or can you pull up the sound settings?
Let me.
Oh, okay, I'll plug it in right now then. It should be like press. Yeah.
The intercept survey
okay.
mass.gov, Bruce Lawson site, 914.
Since he very bravely volunteered his website.
Enter leaving menus about blank, Bruce Lawson's personal site, Mozilla Firefox, Bruce Lawson's personal site, 27 regions, 21 headings and 187 links. Bruce Lawson's personal site, visited heading level 1 link, Bruce Lawson.
So I'm going to stop that there. First thing you learn when you put a screen reader is the key to stop it talking. There is only so much talking.
Okay, we'll only play it a little bit because we don't really have time, but it's useful because if you just put a bunch of divs, then the screen readers will read some random, div. Like it won't tell much to those who are hard of sight. And it won't be useful for the screen reader to just blabber all about these divs when there's actually better options. Like, you could have said, this is a header, the reading list is a header, and it'll say like, header reading list instead of div. Okay. And it also is good for keyboard navigation. A lot of these tags, semantic tags, they have built in like keyboard controls. So like if you fill out a form, you can tab and then get your way to the next element on the form to fill out. And this is really useful. Whereas if you just use a div, you don't have that built-in keyboard control.
You can post during the course of the day and in
Okay. So, like I said, it's very good it's very machine readable. Like even the screen reader can read it if you use good semantics. And it's also human readable. So one thing that's important for you guys is that most of y'all might be working with a group for this weblog project. And it's good that your partner knows what's going on. Like it's very good if your partner can understand your code. And using semantics is one step to making that happen. Especially because you might hand off to your partner to change some stuff in your code and use all of those Git things that that kind of talked about. Yeah. Okay, so don't just use div. If you use div the entire time, then that is bad. Instead, search through other possibly more accommodating tags on MDN. Okay, and so that wraps up our HTML section. Now we'll move on to CSS. Okay. So CSS is short for cascading style sheets, and they're basically rules that tell your browser how stuff looks. So if you think of HTML as a skeleton, CSS alters that skeleton to make it very pretty. Okay. And it is basically a list of descriptions, which you will find out later. So on our website for the dining menu, we have this very beautiful website that MIT made. And this comes from this site, which is just the HTML. And obviously we would like this one more than this one. Okay. So it just makes things prettier. It makes things prettier to the user, which is probably important if you guys want to improve your UI, especially because this theme is maybe, it could be for UI, you and I. And yeah, look at this pretty, beautiful Squidward. Okay, so now how you actually do this is you have a CSS rule set in your CSS sheet. We have a selector, and we have a property and a value. So for those of you who have coded before, this might look similar to a dictionary or an object. You can think of it like that. But yeah, it's basically saying that all of those who have that selector, like all of the divs, we need to make the color of the font red. We want to make the font Arial and then the size 24 point. It's basically just specifying what you want to alter in that div. So as an example, let's just make these divs. So we have two divs, paragraph and info. Now, if we use the same style sheet or rule set, we'll see that both of these divs are now red with Arial 24 point font. And this is good. This is what we want. But now what if we want to alter some of the things, but not all? So what if we want to alter some of the divs, but not all of the divs? Well, we can add an attribute called class and set its value to be info. And this is very useful for CSS because then we can change the selector to be dot, the name of the class, which is info, and then it'll only alter info. Similarly, we can set its ID to be unique. So ID is an attribute. We can set its value to be unique. And now the selector is the pound symbol plus the name of the ID. And it'll only change those with ID unique, which is only just one, which you will see because the difference between an ID and a class is that an ID, you can think of it as an actual ID. Only one person can have this ID. This ID cannot be assigned to multiple people. Whereas for a class, you can think of it as a class too. You can take multiple classes and multiple people can also take those classes. So here we have an example. The ID is only specific to that div. Whereas for class, you can have multiple classes that are spaced out. And that's how we set its value. So we don't have commas to separate out our classes. We instead use spaces. And this could be really useful for if you want to modularize your classes. This is something that we will get to later, the idea of modularization. But briefly, suppose you want to style something and make it red with some font, some alignment and stuff like that. Now, what if you want to style something else with the same font and the same font size and color, but a different alignment? Now you would have to write the entire thing that you wrote before, plus a different alignment. But an easier way to do that is to make sure that your classes are modular, as in you can reuse your classes. So perhaps you can instead make a class that is for alignment purposes, to which you can just add that class to your string of classes. And then you can just alter it that way instead of having to create a whole new class for those specific set of properties. So you can have a class that is only meant to change the alignment. You can have a class that is only meant to change the color and so on. Okay. And again, how those are written in your CSS sheet. The ID comes with a pound symbol in front as a selector, and then the class name comes with a period in front as the selector. And all else is the same. And people primarily use classes for CSS styling. There's not much reason to use classes other than that. Okay. And then now, how we combine HTML and CSS to make a beautiful Squidward. It's pretty easy. You just insert this thing called link tag, and rel is short for like your relationship. So this is a style sheet, and then your href is style.css. Now, again, like rel and href, they're all attributes, and those are your attribute values. And note that this is different from an actual hyperlink, which is the anchor or a tag. Just make sure to not mix these two up, otherwise you won't be getting any styles. So in conclusion, we have HTML, which is your nested boxes. It gives you the structure of your page. And then to make it all come together, you use CSS, which is a list of descriptions saying what this page should look like. Okay, and now we'll go to lunch, but during that, please make sure that you have everything ready for workshop 0 for Nick and Kwong to talk about later. And so please set up your terminal and VS Code. And to do that, you can go to this hyper or short link weblab.is/install. And yeah,